Hi guys, welcome back to a brand new video, and today we're going to talk all things cues. So we're going to talk about the cue itself, materials, length, weight, balance, ferrules, tip sizes, all these different things, and hopefully this will help you select the correct cue if you're in the market for a new cue or even buying your very first cue. So there's a few things obviously we need to look at. So this is obviously our main piece of equipment. This is what has to be perfect. It has to feel great in our hands. I always think that if a cue feels great, it ultimately gives you more confidence in obviously what you're using. So let's get started. So the first thing we're going to look at is the different types of materials. So mainly you're going to get either ash or maple. So my cue is an ash cue. Obviously with an ash cue you can see the grain all the way through the cue. On one side you'll generally find that there are arrows. A lot of people use these arrows as they look down the cue. A lot of people like to use these, and they can obviously see how far they bring the cue back, where if you're using a maple cue, that tends to be a cleaner piece of wood, and you don't really get the grain like you do on an ash cue. So a lot of people can get a little bit lost with sighting and things just when they're using maple, just because obviously there's no grain to go off and it looks pretty much similar all the way down the cue. Also, I think in my personal experience, I feel ash is a little bit more forgiving in terms of deflection than a maple cue. So when we talk about deflection, when we strike the cue ball, as if we were going to play the cue ball along the bolt line now, if we aimed with either left or right hand spin, deflection is how much the cue ball pushes off that line of aim. So if we played with right hand side at the bottom of the cue ball, it will deflect over to the left. So that is what we call deflection. There's different terms you may have heard, throw or push, but ultimately they all mean the same thing. So if you're someone who plays with a lot of side spin, obviously the maple cue is going to push a little bit more. So the more it pushes, you're going to have to be a little bit more accurate, where I feel with the ash it is a little bit more forgiving. So let's now move on to length of the cue. So I'm 6 foot, so I would say if you're anything between 5'8" and 6 foot, generally I would say a 58-inch cue would be perfect for you. So mine's 58-inch. We don't want anything that's too long, and obviously we don't want anything that is too short. So for me, 58-inch is the optimum length. So what we're looking for in terms of length, when we hold the cue, generally we want maybe 2 or 3 inches at the back of the cue, and then off the bridge hand anything between 10-inch and a foot, so 10 and 12 inches. So when we hold the cue, we want our arm to be completely vertical, so straight down, having 2 or 3 inches at the back, and then between 10 and 12 inches at the front. If we were going to play with a longer cue, what you'll generally find that people will have too much cue at the front of their bridge, and it just becomes a little bit unstable. There's obviously players who do play with a longer cue at the front, Luca Bressel being one. Obviously Luca's a great player, so that does work for him, but in terms of consistency, generally 10 to 12 inches off the V on the bridge, and you want a couple of inches at the back. So having that extra couple of inches at the back, that helps with any shots where you may be stretching, for example. You can just add a couple more inches onto the grip just to stretch for those shots. But I think it also comes in handy when we've got a cue ball that is, say, a little bit too close to the cushion to get the hand on to feel comfortable, and then when we've got our hand on the cushion, we can hold a little bit further back and then have that extra couple of inches at the front to reach the cue ball. So in terms of length, 58 inch if you're 5'8" to 6 foot, 58 is going to be the optimum length. So let's move on to weight of the cue. So personally, I think anything between 17.5 to 18.5 ounces is the ideal weight. You don't want anything too heavy. The heavier you go, you're going to get a little bit more action on the cue ball, so you're probably going to generate more spin a lot easier, but you start losing a bit of the feel because it comes a little bit too heavy. So it's good in finding that middle ground. So like I say, 17.5 to 18.5 ounces, you're still going to be able to generate spin on the cue ball, but it's not going to feel uncomfortable on the hand basically. So I used to have a maple cue, and I thought I was struggling to get a lot of action on the white, so side spin, top spin, anything. And I took my cue up to Stuart up at Green Bays at Stockton-on-Tees, and I let Stuart weigh my maple cue, and it turned out it weighed just over 16 ounces, which is incredibly light. I think he said it's one of the lightest he's seen for a snooker cue, and I obviously felt I wasn't getting any action on the cue ball, and I think that was a big part of it. So I went up there, I changed my cue. This is a GBL Vanquish, and it is 18.5 ounces, and this is a lot better weight for me. I feel I can get the spin that I want on the cue ball, and it doesn't feel too heavy. So big thanks to Stu and the team up at Green Bays. If you're ever near the area or looking for a cue, then do nip up to the shop. It's a fantastic shop. There are hundreds of cues, pool cues, snooker tables, pool tables, so you can try out all the different cues in there. And like I said, Stu and the team are fantastic. They can't do enough for you. So also have a look online at the online shop at different cues that they do have. So overall, weight wise, 17.5, 18.5 ounces. Don't go too heavy because it just won't feel that comfortable. So now let's have a look at the balance point of the cue. So the balance point is obviously when we put our cue horizontally and we put it on the finger, where is the point of balance? So around there for me, a little bit further. So around this area. So anything probably between 16.5 to 18 inches is probably the ideal balance point. You'll find that once the balance starts going a little bit too far back, so lower than 16 inches, that the cue will feel a little bit light on the bridge hand and a little bit too heavy in the hand. So you're just going to lose a little bit of feel. So in terms of balance point, 16.5 to 18 inches is probably the optimum distance. So now let's talk about tip size. So my tip is about 9.2. So anything from 9.2 up to 9.7, 9.8. So straight down the middle, 9.5 if you were looking for a new cue. Anything that's above probably 9.8, your 10mm tips, they start getting a little bit too much deflection. So you have too much deflection and you don't really generate as much spin as a slightly smaller tip. So obviously you can ask, well, why don't we just use the smallest tip possible that doesn't deflect, and obviously we generate more spin? Because the smaller we do go, then you're going to have to be a little bit more accurate where you're aiming on the cue ball, because obviously the tip is a smaller size then. So it's finding that middle ground. So anything from 9.2 to 9.7 going to be a good starting point for you. So I would probably stick at a 9.5. So just while we're talking about tip size, we may as well have a look at the tip itself. So there's so many different tips out there. This is like picking a cue. There's now hundreds of brands of different tips, and it's just finding one that you feel comfortable and does exactly what you want. So tip wise, recently I've used a couple of different tips. So I used one from Andrew Paget, which is called AP Exotic. They're a lovely press tip. You can get them small, medium, and hard. I think I used the medium, which is still quite hard. So I don't want anything that is too soft. So obviously, the softer the tip, you're going to get less spin and more deflection on the cue ball. So I like a tip that's a little bit harder. Obviously, I don't want it too hard. If you've seen Mark Williams and heard Mark Williams' tip, I mean that is so hard. I'm not sure how he plays with it, but that's how he likes it. So like I say, I've used Andrew Paget's tips and also Elliot Slesser's. So they're both really good tips. If you like a slightly firmer tip, I'd certainly go for the medium, either the hard of Andrew's and Elliot's. I think he only has one grade, and they're normally quite hard anyway. So, but just bear that in mind with how hard or soft you do have the tip. Obviously, softer is going to deflect a little bit more. So just be careful with that when choosing your tip. So when you've actually chosen your tip, obviously then we have to decide how you shape it. So for me, I've personally found that a tip with a more dome generally will give you more spin. And the reason I say that is because if we have an example here, if we have a cue ball, if we have a tip that's fairly flat, I've just got an old block of chalk, if we've got a tip that's fairly flat and it touches the white, we can obviously see the surface area is very, very minimal. But if we use the tip with a dome, so if that was a dome tip, I feel you get a little bit more purchase, and as the tip slightly squashes as you strike, it's going to just grab the cue ball a little bit more. So for me, I like a bit more of a domed tip as opposed to too flat. So the only really thing left to talk about, this is quite a interesting topic, is now the ferrule. So obviously many years ago, or not even not long ago actually, where brass was the dominant material for the ferrule. But as you see in now, I'm sure everyone watching the World Championships has obviously noticed that apparently Ronnie is playing with a titanium ferrule. So a lot of players also going over to the titanium. So brass is quite a soft material. It's a little bit heavier than titanium. So with a brass ferrule, you'll find that again, you're going to get a little bit more cue ball deflection when you do strike the ball. So players seem to be going down the titanium route just to decrease deflection. So it's a little bit more forgiving in that respect. So again, if you're someone who is comfortable playing with a lot of side, and you do play with a lot of side, then of course stick with the brass. But if you want to lessen that deflection and be a little bit more accurate, and it can be a little bit more forgiving, then I would probably urge that you try titanium. I don't really see any negatives towards titanium ferrules, to be honest. Obviously when you do change over, it's going to be a little bit different, of course it will, but as you get used to it, you'll find that things become a little bit easier. So the reason titanium doesn't deflect as much is basically it's a much lighter material than brass. It's a lot stronger and a lot lighter, so it doesn't deflect quite as much. I remember going to practice with former world champion Peter Ebden, and I remember that Peter had a nylon ferrule on. I've not really seen many of them, but I presume nylon again is probably lighter than titanium. I'm not sure, but but I'd imagine that that was pretty low deflection also. So the Feral was quite a big talking point. For me, I would urge you to try a titanium. Obviously less deflection, more accuracy. Like I said, I just don't see any downsides to using it really. So I use the titanium. So my cue is 58 inches long. We've got a 9.2 mil tip, titanium ferrule, and 18.5 ounces. So if you did want to try a titanium ferrule, as I mentioned before, just head up to Stuart Green Bays up at Stockton, and he'll put one on for you, no problem. And if it turns out that you don't like it, he can just switch it back to brass for you. So there's a lot of positives with titanium. I'll certainly try it. Nothing lost. You can always just change it back. It's not an issue, but it's definitely worth trying. You'll find that when you can play with a little bit less deflection, it's a little bit more forgiving. You don't have to be as accurate when obviously the cue board does deflect. So obviously there's different ways in which you can counteract certain things. So for example, if you have a slightly softer tip but using it with a titanium ferrule, then it's obviously not going to push quite as much if you were using a soft tip and a brass ferrule. And also if you use a hard tip in a titanium ferrule, it's obviously the deflection is going to be a lot lower. So there are different ways to combat deflection, but again, it's just what works for you. There's so many different combinations and no cue is the same. It's what feels good to you, feels good in your hand, and what ultimately gives you the confidence to play. So what about the cost of a cue? Does a cue that is more expensive mean it's going to play better? No, not necessarily. I think my cue was between £400 and £600, I think, and it's just a lovely cue. Absolutely love it. Green Bay's Vanquish. So obviously, if you're paying a lot of money for a cue, a lot of the time you're paying for, especially ash cues, you're paying the way the grain looks, the nicer looking shafts. Also, how much work has gone into the cue. So obviously, if you're having a cue with a lot of different splices, then you can use different woods for the butt. I think this one's ebony, but you can use all different splicings in the cue, and ultimately, that creates a lot more work. Hence the price. So a cue that is expensive doesn't necessarily mean it's going to play any better. So I would recommend anything between £350 up to £550, £600, something in that bracket will give you a good solid cue. Like I say, you can't go wrong with the GBL, the Maximus, Tom Prarum. So there's a few cues, especially the ones from Thailand. They're all good quality wood, so you won't go too far wrong with one of those. So there we go, guys, just a little rundown on a few different things to look out for when picking a new cue. I'm by no means an expert on cues. This is just little bits that I've picked up over the years, but again, just go and speak to Stu up at Green Bays and the rest of the boys, and they will point you in the right direction. Just go and take some cues off the rack, play on the tables. I know when I was picking my cue, I knew exactly where to start. So first of all, it was the length. So I knew I wanted 58 inch, and I knew it had to be around 9.2 mil the tip. So those were the first 2 points that I was looking for. I picked 6 cues at 58 inch, 9.2 tip size, and then just played with the cues, and each of them played slightly different until I settled on this one, where I thought it gave me the right amount of deflection, and it just suited my game a little bit more. So like I say, I'm by no means an expert. but hopefully those little pointers will point you in the right direction when it comes to picking a cue. So in the meantime, do have a check out of all the other videos that I've got on the channel, and as always, if you like the content, then please do like, share and subscribe. Obviously it does help massively for the channel. And if anyone would like coaching, we do it here in this room, on this table, and online sessions are also available if you can't make it in person. So in the meantime, just keep practicing and we'll see you soon.